Well, welcome to this video. We in the helping profession, we want to make a difference in people's lives, and we want to know how we can make real change in the counseling room. Today we're going to talk about how to bring about change in the counseling room. We'll talk about change in general. We'll talk about how to do an assessment, how to gather information, how to set goals, and how to develop a treatment plan, and how to use interventions to bring about change in the room. You know, clients come to us for many different reasons. Some come because they're dealing with current issues in their lives. Some are trying to heal and make sense of things that have happened to them a long time ago. Some have had great losses or traumatic experiences or difficult situations in life that they're facing with. And they all want to know how to deal with it. People come to us because they are unable to make sense of the situation. They're unable to move through it and manage what they're facing on their own. So they're reaching out to get unstuck. And they come because they do want to be led into a more meaningful life, more healthy and caring relationships. And you know, Jesus promises us a fulfilling life, an abundant life. Christ has come to give us a richer life, to bind up our wounds and to heal our hearts and to love us and treasure us and to live fully for Him. So we as counselors then ask, how can we bring about this kind of change and growth in the counseling room? And a natural question that arises from that is, which is the one best therapy or model that brings about the most change? Well, many comparative studies have been made to find out the best one, and there isn't one. Now, studies have shown that there might be a best therapy model for a specific issue that helps that specific issue best. But all models have their weaknesses and strengths, and all have an ability to help people that come into our therapy room. So regardless of our theories and our techniques, what does bring change about in the room? Well, techniques are set aside. One thing we know for certain, and that is human relationships are crucial to our well-being. Not only our development as we are growing up and our development as a person, but also as we face life situations and we face how to change and grow and deal with these life situations. So at the heart of counseling is this relationship between the counselor and the therapist, because key to growth is to be able to grow in a safe relationship. Research has also shown two things that are crucial to change in the room. First, that therapists are warm and empathetic, that therapists are comfortable with closeness and able to show support and understanding. And a second key aspect is the relationship between the counselor and the client. And more specifically, that the client feels positively about this relationship, that the client feels that the counselor is confident about the work to be done. The counselor sort of gives hope in the relationship to the client. So what are the foundational aspects of counseling? I want to go over 4 of them quickly. First, counseling becomes a secure base. It becomes the secure base for the client. The structure, the meeting place, the setting is a secure base for the client from which they can move and venture out into life's difficulties. The counseling also becomes, secondly, a safe haven. That relationship becomes a safe place where they can explore who they are, explore what they're going through, and feel that they're understood and cared for. Thirdly, counseling becomes a place that understanding can be fostered. Understanding about themselves, about their situation, about what they're facing, about how they act and react in situations, about their strengths and resources that they may or may not feel are available to them, and understanding about maybe what they're not aware of that can promote growth. And then fourthly, counseling becomes a place to facilitate growth and change. This is a place where new emotional experiences are experienced, where patterns emerge, where new resources are tapped into, options are opened up, new choices open up, new strategies open up, and new ways of being in relationship with other people, new ways of reacting, of seeing things open up. And remember that it's not only what you do in counseling as a counselor that is important. The client and what they do with counseling is of equal importance. As Gerard Etkin says, clients can choose to live more effectively or not. It is up to a client to take and integrate the growth and the insights and the understanding that they discover in counseling, and then allow that to trickle and flow and impact the rest of their lives. Now we get to goal setting in counseling. Goal setting. There are 3 stages to counseling that we need to set goals for. The first stage, of course, is the beginning stage, where we will do assessment and gather a story of the client and gather information and set our goals. Secondly would be the middle phase of counseling. And in the middle phase, we're implementing the goals, we're implementing our treatment plan, and doing maybe the deeper work of our counseling. And then we progress to the end stage of counseling. And this is where we get to evaluate how has the client met their goals, how has their life been impacted and changed by counseling, and how can these changes trickle over into the rest of their lives. So those are the 3 stages, and I'd like to start out by reviewing the beginning stage goals. What are the goals that you want to set for yourself when a client first comes in during those first few sessions? And this is a very crucial stage of counseling, because this is where you will set goals, you will get a picture of the client that will inform the goals that you do set and help you put together and establish a treatment plan. So the first is assessment. Here in assessment, the first few sessions, you will be building the relationship. You will be creating that safe haven. You will be developing a bond with the client, and through your responses, how you dialogue, how you sit in the room with that person is how you will build your relationship. Secondly, you will get to know the client. You'll get a feel for their story of why they're coming in and how they would like to grow. And thirdly, all this information, all this picture that you gather is going to guide you in the goals and the direction you'll go in therapy. So to gather a picture of a story and to get a deeper sense of this person who has taken the courage to step out and come and sit with you, begin by asking a simple question. What brings you to counseling at this time in your life? And allow them to share with you a bit of their story. Secondly, get a history of the problem. Ask questions like, tell me, when did this all start? What was life like before this all happened? What made you decide to come into counseling? Thirdly, start assessing and asking for strengths and resources available to this client. Who in their life supports them? Where do they have a safe place where they can turn and process and talk and share? How else have they dealt with other difficulties in their life? How have they dealt with other transition and other life struggles? What are their strengths and resources available to this person? Now, how will you gather this information? Well, obviously, you're going to ask a lot of questions. You're going to ask a lot of open-ended questions. You're going to listen. You will then empathize. You'll validate, maybe reflect back to them what you heard, and then ask some more questions. Another way is to also observe the client. What is the general sense you get as you watch this client speak and feel in the room? How do they sit? How are they dressed? How do they talk? Do they talk very fast or very slow-paced? What's their affect, their emotions like in the room? Are they flat affect, not showing much emotion? Is their emotion congruent with what they're talking about? If they're talking about a very sad event that happened in their life? Are they talking about that with a very flat affect or giggling as they talk about certain things? Make note of that. Thirdly, maybe you can do a genogram. Maybe you can diagram their family dynamics and bring in a photo album that can outline their life chart as to what has encountered and what they've faced over the many years. Assessment tool. Maybe you can use some assessment tools such as the Beck Depression for depression, or maybe for marital, there's the Locke-Wallace or the Haven of Safety scale that can give you a broader picture of the client. Now, goal setting. Setting goals with the client as to what they would like to accomplish in your time together. One way to ask that is to ask the miracle question. You can ask, if tonight, as you sleep, you could have all the changes in your life that you would want, how would your life be different in the morning? How would I know your life is different? And allow them to share that. Allow them to share what changes they will like to see happen if they had this miracle. You can also ask, if you had a friend who was going through the same situation and circumstance that you're going through, how would you help them? What advice would you give them? How would you walk them through it? And this will give you an idea of what they are asking for and needing and wanting out of counseling. You can come right out and ask them, how would you like to grow as a result of counseling? You can ask them, what changes would you like to make? You can ask them specifically, what are your goals? As you set goals with your client, goals must be realistic and specific versus general and broad, such as someone coming and saying, I just want to be happy in my life. Well, that's a big task and very broad. Maybe more specific. I would like to build some meaningful relationships in my life that I think then I will be able to be happier and more fulfilled. That's more specific. Secondly, make sure the goals are measurable rather than general. Rather than saying, well, I'd like to have lots of friends. Maybe more specifically, I'd like to initiate 2 friendships this month in my life. Thirdly, what specific steps can the client take to attain these goals? Maybe they'd say, maybe I can join 2 support groups. Maybe I'll ask some of these people that I meet out to coffee. And fourthly, what resources would they need to attain this goal? Maybe the client will say, well, maybe I need to learn how to start a conversation, what to talk about, and how to continue a conversation after I've said, hello, how are you? What insight or understanding about themselves does the client need to be able to attain these goals? Maybe they need to understand that they fear being hurt, and so they push away people and reject others before they feel that they will be rejected. You can also ask them, how committed are they to their goals? You might find out that after a week of setting some goals, they might say, I'm too busy to even go out and join these groups or to join a support group. I'm just too busy. Next, you can set goals that you can accomplish in the amount of time that you have with the client. Know how many sessions that you will be sitting with them. Know that if you only have 10 sessions, how many goals realistically can you set and move towards and attain in those 10 sessions. And keep in mind the presenting problem, the bigger issues that the client is dealing with, and the journey that they will be going on towards healing and growth as they deal with those issues, such as if a person's spouse has recently died, then you have an idea in your mind. They will be going through the grief process. They will be mourning their loss. They will be restructuring life around that loss. And I need to help them attain realistic goals that fits with what they're facing in their life specifically. What are some of the major issues that a client will be facing that they will probably bringing into the counseling room with you? I want to just briefly mention 6, and we're going to go into more detail during our treatment plan with them. First would be depression and anxiety. You'll probably see a lot of people who are depressed or anxious. Relationship difficulties. That's also one of the #1 reasons someone comes into counseling, is difficulties in their relationships. Thirdly is parenting issues. Fourth, life adjustments, changes and struggles that they've had in their lives that they're dealing with. Another is loss and trauma. And then 6 is addictions, maybe substance or sexual or gambling addictions that they're stuck in. So as you think and keep in mind these main issues that people will be coming in with, as you think of the goals that they want to set, as you've gathered a picture of what this person's life is about, what their experience is about, and where they want to grow and change, you can then formulate and establish your treatment plans. And treatment plans will come out of the goals that the client wants to set and the issues they're facing, as I've explained. So the first goal in a treatment plan, I would like to say right off the front, is to assess for potential crises. If a client is suicidal, homicidal, if they're abusing or being abused, if there's domestic violence going on or substance abuse, those issues will need to be dealt with first and right away before you can move into other goals and your treatment plan. Suicide. They might say once in a while little statements like, "Why live anymore? I feel so hopeless. I have nothing to live for." Homicide. A husband might be very angry and own a gun and say, "I am so mad at my wife for having an affair." Maybe an abuse. Maybe a couple is having horrible, angry fights in front of the children. Maybe one of the spouse is drinking, and Friday night it's his responsibility to take care of the children. What happens to the children when he's drinking? This is possible abuse. Child abuse, and also abuse to aging parents. Maybe one of the children are not taking care of an aging parent or not taking care of a handicapped person or child. And about domestic violence, there's a lot of shoving and pushing going on as the couple argues. Substance abuse. Is someone on medication? And you also hear them saying, "But I went out drinking last night. I just needed to get away from my issues." They know that this could possibly be a dangerous situation if they join and combine certain medications with alcohol. That can be a lethal combination, and you'll need to assess and deal with that first. You'll also need to deal and assess with legal and ethical issues that they might be facing and come up in the case. And this, I want to refer you to your standards of profession and what counseling status you have. Know the governing boards that are above you and know what their standards are for legal and ethical issues that you'll be dealing with. First, though, I quickly want to review is that ethically, we need to provide effective treatment. We need to make sure our clients are sober and fully able to participate in treatment, and that all crisis issues are managed, dealt with, and are taken care of before we can be very effective in our treatment plan. Secondly, keep everyone safe. Do no harm and stop no harm. Thirdly, have the client be aware of all the different business aspects of being in counseling. And I refer you to your governing board to find what they require you to do with record keeping, note taking, the signing of releases, how you establish fee, etc., etc. Fourthly is limits to confidentiality. It is important that the clients know that you will hold confidence unless you are legally mandated to report child abuse, or unless you know that suicide and homicide is a very viable thing, that you will do what you can to stop them from committing suicide or hurting others. And this might include bringing in the help of other people to prevent that. And clients need to know up front that this will be the case, that everything is said in counseling will be held in confidence, except when you want to protect them and protect those around them. And also, fifthly, know your limitations. Know what you can and you can't do. Be sure that you are within your scope of practice. Know what issues you are comfortable with dealing with, know what you have education and experience in, and know where your expertise is. And then secondly, be aware of your own values and biases and what we call our countertransferences in the room, that this might be impacting the counseling. For example, if you're sitting with a husband and a wife, and the wife is nagging and complaining just like your own wife at home, and you suddenly feel like you're taking the side of the husband, and that you're maybe doing a little bit of blaming and scolding the wife and not being very empathetic, then just know your own feelings that are coming up are impacting your effectiveness, and you need to be aware of that. What you need to do if you do feel that you're over your head, or that the dynamics between you and your client are interfering with your effectiveness, I just want to quickly mention 5 things that you can do. First, pray for wisdom and understanding. Pray for insight as to what is going on in regards to your own issues as well as what's going on with the client. Secondly, read. Gain a deeper understanding of the client's issues and what is going on in them. If you face a client that you have not dealt with that issue before, for example, if you've never dealt with depression before, read up on that. Be informed. What are the best theories and techniques and interventions? What has worked? What does research show that works for working with people with depression? Thirdly, seek consultation with other counselors. Call up some professional counselors in your area. Establish a relationship with them. Call them and say, I'd just like to get your input. I have someone who's, addicted to gambling. What have you learned from your experience? Get consultation. And fourthly, seek counseling yourself. Be a growing person and understanding your own issues, your own feelings and experience that rises up. Take that into your own counseling so that you can process that and make sense of that. And fifthly, refer. Refer the client to another counselor whom you feel would be more effective. And referring is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of wisdom, that you have assessed, done all you can, and that greater wisdom and to promote greater change is to refer the client to someone who is more experienced. Now we come to the treatment aspect, and this is in the middle stage of our counseling. As you remember, during our beginning stage, we did assessment. We got a feel for the story of the client. We got a feel for what they were going through, and we got a sense of the goals that they would like to accomplish during our time together. We assessed for crises. We took care of legal and ethical issues and made sure that those were taken care of. And now we come to the middle and the bulk of our treatment, which is the treatment planning. And based on our diagnoses, based on the story and sense we get from our client, we will now outline and chart, maybe come up with 4 or 5 goals to work towards as we bring growth and change with our client. And I have joining me for this section Catherine Hart-Weber. She's a marriage and family therapist and author of several books. And she will be joining us in talking through some treatment plans. Welcome, Catherine.
Good to be
with
you, Sharon.
And join
Thanks.
us. Yes. You know, as we talk about treatment plans, Catherine, I know we were talking earlier about taking into account some key factors when we're devising our treatment plans. That we must remember this is about the client, not about us putting our interventions onto the client. And so we do need to take into account their age, their gender. We need to take into account their developmental stage. Are they children? Are they teens? Are they elderly? In their 20s. So that is key and real important.
It's also really helpful to know if they've been in counseling before. How have they dealt with some of the situations, similar situations? Have they been in this situation before? And then to really, I think it's helpful to see them as a whole person. And we just really are part of their journey. The counseling, we might only have a couple sessions or maybe a year, but we only are part of their journey. And they, as a whole person, body, mind, spirit in their relationship, we need to be thinking of other ways that we can connect them with support. And their medical and their social and their economic factors and how those have all impacted their counseling.
Yes, yes, that's very true. I wanted to go back to when you said we really need to take into account different ways that we can support people to help them move towards their growth and their goals. And that would be referrals.
Referrals.
Yes.
Right.
To think of what referrals could I make? Who could I refer these clients to, such as
A medical doctor.
Medical doctor.
Absolutely. I think that, for instance, in depression and some of the other kinds of children who have learning disabilities and maybe need to be on some kind of medication, very important to refer to a doctor, a psychiatrist, for medication. And then you want to be looking at the other network of support systems, maybe a support group for those who are in substance abuse, or a grief support group. That's really important, to be connecting them and building other relationships outside of the therapy room, developing skills and other resources. You might need to refer to a nutritionist. Some people might need to take a look at their diet and their health, especially if there's health-related issues. And so working in partnership with the other professionals and out of your scope of practice. You might only be a part of their journey. They might need to be working with a pastor on some of the spiritual and questions they have.
Yes. So really thinking about what paths can you put your clients in front of that will help them, move them towards growth. So referrals are real important. Now I'd like to move towards the treatment plans and setting and devising treatment plans. Now in our treatment plans, first they say that two of the top reasons why people come to counseling is depression and relationships. So let's start with depression. And I know you've written a book on depression. I know you speak widely about it. What are some help us think of how we can recognize that we are dealing with depression, and what some goals can we set in our treatment plan for dealing with depression?
Well, stress, anxiety, and depression are often very linked together, and we know now they are epidemic, and that it's really considered the #1 mental health problem in America. So no matter what problems somebody might be going through, there might be an element of definitely prolonged stress, long-term stress, maybe some depression, some frustration, some hopelessness, and feeling stuck in this situation. And then anxiety very often goes with that. When you're feeling depressed and you're stressed, panic attacks now are epidemic. People just, their body hold in all the stress and the depression, so panic attacks might be something that you will see along with depression. So one of the first tasks then, of course, is to help to assess, of course, for crisis. Have they found a way of dealing with their pain to end it all? When you feel hopeless and helpless, and your mind thinks very negative thoughts, and you reach a place of despair, you will think of ending it. So assessing for a suicide is very important. Then you want to start then immediately with the client, giving them a sense of hope. Because if there's if they've come to you at such a sort of end of their rope, you want to start building some optimism, some hope. And that might be really practical too, saying this week, setting some short-term goals with them, the goal for this week, not for the rest of your life. But this week, let's see, we're going to move forward in this, for this step, and this is a goal for this week. So very small steps. It's fostering hope is important, the optimism, and then if there is some loss associated with the anxiety and the stress and the depression, you really want to be working through the loss and the stages of the loss, helping them adjust to that. Highly recommend getting a medical referral. Then again, this is when you are working as a team, looking at them as a whole person. There could be a reason for the depression that's physiological. So get to the bottom of why is this person depressed. They might come in and it might be frustration in the relationship, but underlining it, it really was childhood abuse. And that ongoingly they've really been struggling with not knowing how to be in a relationship and experiencing deep loss every time they have a rupture in the relationship, or there's some kind of attachment difficulty or separation because of something in childhood. So understand what is the underlying cause for the depression, and medical evaluation is very necessary, because it could be thyroid. For women, it could be hormonal. If a patient has a history of say, a heart disease, depression is very high correlation with those kinds of issues. So it's important to really get a full picture of what the underlying cause is, and then maybe the layers of that.
And then setting some goals depending on the layer, like life
Right.
charting, changing the schedule, hope for that week,
And then very
goals
practical,
for
right.
working with deeper issues.
Yes.
And as we move on to our second most popular issue, that a reason why people come into counseling is relationship difficulties, and specifically marriage difficulties,
Right.
and then parent-child difficulties. But primarily with marriage difficulties, we see couples who have very negative fight cycles that really hinder them from emotionally connecting.
Right.
They're getting caught in a cycle of blame and defend, and what's the truth, and you said this, no I didn't, I said this, and you're never there for me, you don't understand, and they're just stuck
Right.
in that cycle.
And usually that cycle starts in the dating years and then just gets entrenched in the early marriage years, and then
Yes.
usually after about 5 or 7 years, if a couple comes to you, it's very entrenched, and they
Yes.
have no understanding of that.
So then if someone is sitting with a couple and they have, say, 10 sessions, then maybe a couple of those goals would be one, to maybe to identify that fight cycle.
absolutely.
Help them understand who's fighting, who's saying what, who's pursuing who, who's blaming. Understand that fight cycle. And then maybe understand the emotions that go with that fight cycle. I always feel you're not there, you don't care for me, or I always feel that no matter what I say doesn't make a difference. And
That's very effective in working with couples. Just for them to understand that cycle and for them to understand their emotional impact and to get in touch with that. A lot of couples
Yes.
don't understand that.
Yes, and then to move them towards changing that cycle.
Right.
How can they then learn acceptance? How can they learn different ways of expressing their perspective instead of blaming or accusing? How they can bring what they're feeling forward instead of withdrawing, how they can change that cycle. And then another goal might be how they then can support each other, encourage each other, be there for each other, and maybe ways they can show love and concern for each other, and learn how to accept each other. And I know marriage, especially if it's second marriages, are very difficult because people in second marriages thought that getting married again would solve all their problems. So if it is a second marriage, one of the goals might be you're going to need to grieve the loss of your first marriage, understand the dynamics of your first marriage, and understand how you are repeating those dynamics in your current marriage, and how you need to change the way you relate and express your emotions so you can have a healthier relationship.
And in marriage as well, you see, of course, the sexual intimacy is a big part of marriage. And so you'll often see frustration in couples in the sexuality. Some couples might not talk about it at first, but as you explore with a couple, just explore their sexual intimacy. And usually you'll find there's a break in that, and there's frustration in that too. So as you work and grow in the relationship, build intimacy in the relationship, that the sexual intimacy and relationship then also, in parallel to that, will also start growing and getting deeper. So be aware of that, and maybe address some of that with a couple, and just question that and see how practically that might also become a part of the understanding and the intimacy of building in the relationship.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then we move into parent-child relationships. This is another big reason that people come into counseling.
Fix my children.
Fix my children. Yes, they do the name and blame.
Right.
You know, I've named the problem, it's my child, I blame them, now here, fix them. And of course, our temptation as counselors is to say, no, it's not the child's problem. We've named and blamed the problem. It's the parents.
Right.
And you know, Catherine, that 75% of families in counseling, when they're counseled with this name and blame dynamic, drop out.
That's right.
And so we need to
Bet
stay
you
away
they
from
pick up
that.
on that. Wait a minute, I'm the person here being blamed, and I'm not going to take this.
I'm not going to take this. So as we assess family and child dynamics, you know, what would be, say, 2 or 3 goals? One would be maybe setting structure at home, clear, concise. What are the discipline rules and guidelines? Making that predictable for children, and constructive and consistent love. Maybe as we working with the parent-child relationship, building self-esteem, helping a child grow in their identity of themselves and discovering themselves, help the family adjust and accommodate the change changes that the children maybe are going through. Maybe as we work with the children, help them to socially find a place in their peer network.
Right.
Maybe help them at school, look at what successes and what's going on at school. And a good goal to have, and sometimes this one goal is just as important as all the rest, is just to educate the parent on the developmental stages of the child, and help them understand what the child is trying to say in when they act out, and that the child, this is the emotional experience of the child, they haven't been putting it to words, they're acting out. Just educate the parent of that sometimes helps them be able to set more clear boundaries and set the structure and be able to be more consistently loving.
That's huge in helping parents understand the acting out behavior.
Yes.
Because children are developmentally, they're not able to put to words a lot of their frustrations, especially if there's conflict in the marriage, if they're experiencing something that is stressful for them at school, if there's been a move, children will act out their feelings. And that's why in working with a family, and we'll get into that a little bit later, how to work with them, but to find ways to put them into words, their feelings to words. And then for a parent to see, oh, they say they hate me and they want away from home, that's not really what they're saying. They're saying, I feel so trapped. I have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do. So that piece is very, very helpful for families, and to contain them and to realize, you know, this is normal, and this is okay, and this is developmental. Kids do this, but this is what we are, you know, really up against. That's very helpful.
And then also, we might face season of life changes. Maybe they've lost a job, a new baby, a child is leaving home, a child is returning home, they're moving. To be able to, as one main goal would be maybe to educate the person in what is happening to them, normalize their experience, maybe help them make sense of the changes, help them reorganize their life around the changes, and help them build resources and strengths to deal and face with the ups and downs of life. And I want to move to bereavement and loss, Catherine, because that's another reason that people do come in, is loss in life. And it could be a loss of a loved one, or a loss of dreams and hopes. A
lot of people are losing jobs.
Yes, a loss of dreams of a career. And the client comes in, they're dazed, they've lost purpose of life, maybe feeling emotionally disconnected from things that are around them. And the first goal in dealing with grief would be to educate them on the grieving process, help them normalize it, help them not feel that they're not going crazy. They're not just crazy, that this is normal, that this is natural process, the natural steps of grieving and dealing with loss that our bodies go through. And then another goal would be to help them work through the stages of grief that we go through when we lose something, like the depression, the sadness, the despair, the numbness, as you described dealing with depression.
And it's important to grieve every aspect of the loss. I think sometimes we realize there's tangible losses. You lost your job, you lost a loved one, we grieve that. But there are so many the concrete and the other losses that you don't really recognize. You lose a sense of your position, your self-esteem. You lose the connections you had in the community, the friends you had at the office. You lose so much else. And so grieving all those losses and helping someone recognize that, you know, you're frustrated and you're grieving the loss still because there's still other losses here that are legitimate. And to validate that and to normalize that for people.
Absolutely. And then help them reorganize their life around that. Very good point. And then lastly, we come to addictions, substance abuse, you know, sexual or gambling, but especially substance abuse, that these addictions, and even gambling and even the sexual abuse, really has an impact on the person's individual, their own life inside of them, but also their personal life, their family, their friends, work, and helping them, I think, not only to say get sober and stay sober, but also help them to process the impact that their addiction has had on those around them.
And that's usually a big impact. You know,
Yes.
and as we know with addiction, the whole time that you're addicted, you're really disconnected to your emotions.
You're numb.
You're numb, and you're
Yes.
soothing yourself, and you're covering the pain. You really, it's behind it is pain, and it's a very strong physiological connection in the brain that's hard to break.
Right. And so if you're covering pain and you're with say the substance abuse, then one of the goals would be to find new ways
Right.
of
Feeling the pain, identifying the hurt, the emotions, and then finding constructive ways of expressing that, and then they call it soothing it. How do you comfort yourself? How do you find comfort?
Yes. Instead of reaching for the bottle,
Right.
what do I do now when I feel
Drowning your
frustrated?
sorrows, you know, or even now with internet. In the
Yes.
internet chat rooms and pornography, people are
Yes.
reaching out for ways of finding
Yes.
connection and soothing their pain. So
Right. And establishing new goals in life.
yes.
And new ways of relating.
New ways of relating and
Yes.
of knowing how to negotiate your life. Then given these
Right.
feelings, then how do I
Right.
rework my life with that?
Yes.
So it's a
You know, thank you so
process.
much for sitting
you're
and helping
welcome.
us talk this through, Catherine. You know, clients bring us stories that sometimes are so complex, so
are.
sad,
They are.
and so gut-wrenching, and seem so multi-layered that sometimes it's hard to know where to start. You know, what do we pick to do, and the task of walking them through the journey of saying their addictions or their bereavement or their loss or their relationship seems so overwhelming. But sometimes we need to start at one point. Sometimes we might only be able to do one aspect of their process and journey.
and to see them as a whole person, and to know we only part of that one part of their whole journey. The Lord and their relationship with the Lord is important. Their relationships with others on a daily basis are important. Their body, their mind, their spirit, and their relationships all interweave to this healing and change and growth.
Yes.
And we are part of that journey. And they will have a priority. They will say, this is the most prominent priority right now, to be safe, to be sober, to be able to stay in this marriage, to be able to keep myself from smacking my kid, you know, every day, and knowing how to get through the day constructively with my family.
Right. And so we can take that all and listen that experience from our client, and then come up with constructive treatment plans so that our sessions that we have with them are moving us forward, are constructively helping us move towards change and towards growth, the way Christ would have them to be. Yeah. In this last section, I want to talk about taking action. I want to talk about interventions. What interventions would you use to bring about the change, to meet your goals, to implement your treatment plan? And I want to talk through several of them with you. First is, what would you do to help you listen and talk with a client? Well, the first intervention is empathic listening. That is just when you listen in such a way that the client feels heard and understood and valued, that the client feels that you're tracking with them and that you're right with them. You might say something like, yes, I understand how you feel. A second way is validation. This is when you say, yes, it makes sense that you feel the way you feel. Here you respond in such a way that the client knows that their emotion is valid and that their response is understandable. And you know, validation is so powerfully important. I had a therapist I work with. She said she's just a new marriage and family therapist, and she worked with a couple, and they terminated from counseling with her, and they were doing very well. And before they left, she said, what made it the difference? What brought about the change? And both of them said, it was you equally validated our experiences in the room, and it made us realize that we need not fight for truth. We need to try and understand each other's perspective. So validation and empathic listening is a very powerful tool to listen and talk with your clients. Second now is, what can you do to get your client to slow down and touch what they are feeling? Very often our client will bring in story upon story. Let me tell you what happened yesterday and the day before, and they will ramble on with the stories. But how can you slow them down? And in the midst of that story, have them slow down and touch what they are feeling. Well, first, the stance of the therapist in the room is very, very important. The therapist's body language and nonverbals, the way you sit, the way you lean forward, the way you tilt your head, the way you keep eye contact, the show of concern on your face is congruent with what the client is talking about. To help the client slow down and touch their emotions, you can use your body, lean forward, talk slower, maybe softer, maybe say, it sounds like you're very sad right now. And the way you say that mirrors how they feel. Then helps them touch and to go to that place. And maybe pause longer before you speak. Allow the client to sit with what they're feeling, sit with what they've just said. Sometimes we want to fill in the silence. We want to say something really good that will just fix and give them the solution. But allow them just to slow down and sit with their emotion. Another way is to reflect upfront emotions. There's emotions that are on the surface that you see and the client presents, such as anger. And you might say, it seems that you are so angry because you could not get your wife to understand you. That anger is evident in the room, that client is speaking with anger, and you want to just reflect that back to them. I see that you're angry. Next, if you want to try and understand and help the client understand what is the emotion under that, you'll be reflecting below the surface emotions. You might say, yes, you feel like she doesn't understand you. You feel accused, like you're wrong, maybe even bad. I hear that you're mad, but I wonder if you also feel hurt, maybe even sad. And that way, you help a client move to a place where they're not yet gone. Help them access that emotion that is underneath that first initial emotion. I use the image of an M&M, that we usually have a coated candy around the chocolate, and the coated candy protects the chocolate from melting in our hands. Sometimes we have our emotions are that coated candy. Our anger and abruptness and defensiveness is that coated candy, because underneath that we're feeling some emotion that's maybe more tender, maybe more softer, sadness, maybe helplessness, hopelessness. And we want to be able to help our client move to that place. And another intervention on how to do that is, what are you feeling here and now questions. This is when we help our client sort of identify what they're feeling at the moment, and they have not yet been able to express that. And this, we might get our cues from bodily changes, maybe facial expressions, maybe a movement, and make note of that and bring it up, because something happens to a client inside of them that they have not yet been able to put words to. For example, a client suddenly folds their arms. You can ask them, what happened right there? I see you just folded your arms. Or maybe you could say, for example, like, I just noticed that when you were talking about your old house, where you were growing up, you began wringing your hands. What happened right there for you? The client might express, well, I always felt a sense like I was going to get in trouble, that I was in trouble for something. And I felt that, and maybe that's how I feel in all my other relationships. Another intervention is helping our clients expand their experience of what is happening. And we can do that with clarifying questions. We can respond with empathy, then ask them to clarify, to expand their emotion or their view, such as, John, help me understand. When you said that your wife forgot your anniversary, you sort of chuckled and said, oh, well, what do you expect? Help them clarify and expand that experience. Maybe you can do new perspective building. As they're telling you about their story and their circumstance, maybe there's a new perspective that the client might benefit from seeing. Such as a man says, you know, I don't understand what's going on in my family. No one laughs at me. I feel unwanted and unfulfilled at home. And you might have a hunch, and you might be saying, I'm wondering if the family wants to have Dad present, emotionally present. And I'm wondering if his jokes keep him a little protected. His jokes are the candy coating. And so I might say that to him, give him another perspective on what's going on. I might say, maybe your family isn't rejecting you. Maybe they are wanting a daddy, not a comedian. There are some other ways that we can also track interactions with a couple or a family. Say they are fighting profusely. You want to be able to, instead of find who's wrong and who's right, track who pursues and who withdraws. Try and track how are they interacting, how are they protecting their hearts, and how are they trying to get their view expressed. Maybe the wife says, you're never there for me, and the husband defends himself, and then maybe takes a little step back. Maybe the wife pursues more and says, you see, you don't care about me. And the husband might say, I'll never change your view of me, and take another step back. And you start seeing that as the husband defends himself and takes a step back and withdraws, more and more the wife pursues and comes closer, maybe with more heated emotion. And as you see this dynamic and this interactional pattern, you can maybe show them that how this dynamic is causing them to stay emotionally disconnected and preventing them from helping each other understand their perspectives. Now, interventions with children. Sometimes we can't do talk therapy for a whole hour with children, and we have to find other ways to help children express themselves, process what they're going through, to help them understand what is happening to them in their life. And other ways is board games. Maybe having a box of toys to play with. And as you're playing, talk about the game that you're playing. Talk about the different characters. What would it feel like to be one of the characters? Maybe reading a story or drawing a picture and then talking about the different characters in the picture. Maybe bringing in photo albums and talking about the different family events and what it was like to be with the family on those events. With teens, always bring in what teens are interested in. If you are boring, or if you're trying to impose an intervention on a teen, you will lose them. They will shut you out. Help them bring in their favorite music, favorite comic books or storybooks. Help them bring in a photo album or a yearbook from school so that they can talk about their experiences and what is happening to them. What if our interventions don't work? What if we say something and our client looks at us saying, you know, what, you missed me? Slow down and take that as an opportunity to repair the relationship. Many of the clients that see you have had experiences where relationships have been torn, there have been ruptures in the relationships, anger, disappointments, and they haven't had experience of being able to repair. And this will be a chance for you to repair the relationship, to be able to say, I think I missed you, validate, that must feel very hurtful, and then to be able to try something different that can repair that relationship. Always allow your client to teach you and learn from that experience and learn how to repair and to build and grow in that relationship. I pray that as you work with your clients, that the Lord will help you make a difference in their lives. And be aware that you are about God's work. God promises to continue the good work He begun in us and in our clients. That good work that brings healing and hope and wholeness. And know that God will guide you into the next step of growth that He has for for that person. Jesus loves each one of us, and he loves dearly that courageous client that comes and ventures into your office to find some hope, some direction, and some growth in their life. Bless you as you work and minister and counsel those around you.